Insurance fraud investigator Daniel Foster thought he was examining a routine claim for damaged NASA equipment when he uncovered the biggest cover-up in human history. The paperwork claimed that a lunar rover had malfunctioned and been destroyed, but the photographs in the file showed something impossible. The rover had been crushed by a massive mechanical hand emerging from beneath the moon's surface. When Foster tried to file his report, NASA offered him 10 times the normal settlement to close the case without questions, but his curiosity had already been triggered. Foster's private investigation revealed that similar equipment failures had been happening on lunar missions for decades, each incident involving contact with what NASA internally classified as Precambrian anomalous technology. The files he managed to copy described artifacts so old they predated Earth's first complex life forms, yet the technology was still functional and seemed to be expanding its presence on the lunar surface with each passing year. His final discovery before NASA agents raided his office was the most chilling. The alien machinery wasn't just ancient, it was counting. Counting the number of humans on Earth, tracking our technological progress, and according to internal memos, preparing to activate something called Protocol Omega once our population reached a specific threshold. That was 3 weeks ago. Now I'm Daniel Foster and I'm writing this from a motel room in Barstow, California, because my apartment in Houston got torched the day after I made copies of those files. The burn patterns were too clean, too systematic. Professional work. My hands won't stop shaking when I think about that photograph. The mechanical appendage wasn't just crushing the rover, it was examining it, like a child picking apart a toy to understand how it worked. The metal surface showed no corrosion despite supposedly being buried in lunar regolith for nearly 3 billion years. But what really keeps me awake at night is the timestamp on the image. It was taken during a live feed, meaning someone at Mission Control watched this happen in real time and decided to bury it. The coffee maker in this shitty motel room gurgles like it's dying, but I can't afford to sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see that hand again. Articulated fingers the size of school buses, each joint moving with mechanical precision. The rover's camera had captured one final image before being destroyed. Rows upon rows of similar appendages stretching into the darkness of a crater that officially doesn't exist. I've been an insurance investigator for 12 years. I've seen people burn down their own houses, fake their deaths, even mutilate themselves for money. But I've never seen anything like the look of terror in NASA Administrator Briggs's eyes when he handed me that settlement check. It wasn't the fear of being caught in fraud. It was the fear of something much worse being uncovered. Tomorrow, I'm driving to the Mojave Desert. I have coordinates. The coordinates led me to a truck stop outside 29 Palms, where the desert heat made everything shimmer like a mirage. I'd been driving for 6 hours straight, paranoid about every sedan in my rearview mirror. The GPS kept losing signal as I got closer to the meeting point, which should have been my first warning. Blake Garrison was waiting for me in the parking lot, leaning against a dented pickup truck that looked older than both of us combined. I recognized him from the grainy photo in my insurance files, former NASA contractor supposedly fired for misconduct 3 years ago. What the files didn't mention was the burn scars running down his left arm, or the way his eyes never stopped moving, scanning the horizon like he expected trouble. "You Foster?" His voice carried the rasp of too many cigarettes and not enough sleep. "Depends who's asking." He laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. "Shit, man, you're jumpier than I was when they first showed me the footage. Get in, we can't talk here." The truck's interior reeked of motor oil and stale sweat. Blake drove us deeper into the desert, following unmarked dirt roads that probably weren't on any official map. The radio picked up nothing but static, broken occasionally by fragments of Spanish-language broadcasts that cut off mid-sentence. "How do you know I'd come?" I asked. "Because you saw the hand." Blake took a sharp turn around a rock formation that jutted from the sand like a broken tooth. "Everyone who sees that photograph ends up here eventually. The smart ones anyway, the others just disappear." 20 minutes later, we reached what looked like an abandoned research station. Solar panels covered in dust, satellite dishes pointed at empty sky, and a cluster of prefab buildings slowly being reclaimed by the desert. But as we got closer, I noticed details that didn't fit. Fresh tire tracks in the sand, recent footprints around the main building, and power lines that were definitely live. "Welcome to Station Xerxes," Blake said, killing the engine. "Officially, it doesn't exist. Unofficially, it's where NASA has been monitoring lunar transmissions since 1969. Inside the main building, banks of computers hummed quietly in climate-controlled darkness. Multiple screens showed what looked like seismic data, but the wavelengths were too regular, too purposeful. In the center of the room, a massive display showed a real-time image of the moon's far side, marked with dozens of red dots. "Each dot is a confirmed contact site," Blake explained, his fingers dancing across a keyboard. "Places where our equipment has encountered the machinery. The frequency is increasing." The screen switched to a new image, another crushed rover, this one apparently grabbed by something that left claw marks in the metal. Then another, and another. Dozens of incidents spanning decades, each more violent than the last. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. "How long has this been going on?" "Longer than you think." Blake pulled up a file labeled Project Lazarus, 1947. The first photograph made my stomach drop. It showed the wreckage of something that definitely wasn't from Earth, half buried in what looked like a crater. The metal had the same untarnished quality as the mechanical hand from my insurance file. "We found this in Nevada right after Roswell, but here's the thing. Carbon dating showed it was 2.8 billion years old, older than complex life on Earth. The crash wasn't recent. Something had unearthed it." My mouth felt dry as sandpaper. "Unearthed it from where?" Blake's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. "That's what we've been trying to figure out. But 3 weeks ago, all the monitoring stations went crazy. Every seismometer on the lunar surface started picking up activity, deep activity, like something massive was waking up." The main screen flickered, showing new data streams. Numbers and graphs that meant nothing to me, but Blake's face went pale. "What is it?" "The counting frequency just changed." His voice barely rose above a whisper. "It's faster now. Much faster." Outside, I could hear the wind picking up, but it sounded wrong. Too rhythmic, too deliberate, almost like breathing. Blake was already reaching for a radio, but the static that answered his call sounded different than before. Underneath the white noise, I could swear I heard something else. Something that might have been numbers, counting upward in a language that definitely wasn't human. "We need to go deeper underground," Blake said, his hands shaking as he reached for a keycard. "Right fucking now." The elevator descended through solid rock for what felt like forever. Blake's keycard had unlocked a hidden entrance behind the main building, revealing a shaft that plunged at least 300 feet into the desert floor. The walls were lined with cables and conduits that hummed with electrical current, but the deeper we went, the more the humming sounded like voices. "This facility was built in 1952, Blake said, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Right after we realized the Nevada crash wasn't isolated. The military wanted a place to study what they called temporal displacement events. Basically, old shit appearing where it shouldn't be." The elevator shuddered to a stop, and the doors opened onto a corridor that stretched beyond the reach of the fluorescent lights. The air tasted metallic, like licking a battery. Emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly yellow glow, and I could hear the steady drip of water somewhere in the darkness. "Level 1 is archives," Blake explained, leading me past rows of filing cabinets that looked like they hadn't been disturbed in decades. "Level 2 is analysis. Level 3. He paused at another elevator. "Level 3 is where we keep the samples." The second elevator ride was shorter but more unsettling. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the walls showed frost patterns that shouldn't have been possible in the Nevada desert. When the doors opened, I understood why. The air was so cold it burned my lungs, and every surface was covered in a thin layer of ice. "The samples require specific environmental conditions," Blake said, handing me a parka from a wall locker. "The metal degrades if it gets too warm." We learned that the hard way in 73 when half the lab melted. Level 3 looked like a cross between a morgue and a jewelry store. Glass cases lined the walls, each containing fragments of the same untarnished metal I'd seen in the photographs. But these pieces weren't just sitting there, they were moving, subtle movements like breathing causing the ice crystals on the glass to shift in hypnotic patterns. "Blake," I said, my voice cracking, "tell me those things aren't alive." "Define alive." He approached one of the larger cases which contained what looked like a gear the size of a dinner plate. As we watched, the gear rotated exactly 1/8 of a turn, then stopped. They respond to stimuli, they maintain their own temperature. They seem to communicate with each other through some kind of electromagnetic field. But they're definitely not organic. The gear in the case rotated again, and this time, every other gear in the room turned with it. The synchronization was perfect, like they were all part of the same massive machine. "Jesus fuck," I whispered. "What are they building?" Blake led me to the far end of the room where a bank of monitors showed feeds from various lunar sites. The red dots I'd seen upstairs were blinking faster now, and new ones were appearing in real time. That's what we've been trying to figure out for 70 years, but last month we got our first real clue. He pulled up a video file dated 3 weeks ago. The timestamp matched the night my apartment burned. The footage showed a lunar rover approaching one of the contact sites, a crater that officially didn't exist. As the rover's lights illuminated the crater's interior, I saw something that made my knees weak. The bottom wasn't rock or regolith, it was metal. Massive sheets of the same untarnished material, arranged in geometric patterns that hurt to comprehend. And in the center, something that looked like a massive eye, easily 50 feet across, surrounded by concentric circles of smaller sensors. "The eye opened," Blake said quietly. "For the first time in 2.8 billion years, it opened." In the video, the mechanical eye began to glow with a soft blue light. The rover's instruments went haywire, and then the feed cut to static. But not before capturing something else. The ground around the crater was moving, bulging upward like something massive was pushing up from below. "That's when the counting accelerated," Blake continued. "Whatever's down there, it's been dormant since before complex life existed on Earth. But now it's waking up, and it's taking inventory." One of the monitors started beeping urgently. New data streams were appearing, showing seismic activity, not just on the moon, but on Earth. Locations scattered across the globe, all showing the same signature. Something large moving underground. "Blake." My voice sounded strange in the cold air. "How many of these sites are there?" He pulled up a global map. Red dots appeared across every continent, dozens of them, all showing recent activity. But it was the pattern that made my hands shake. The sites weren't random. They formed a grid, perfectly spaced, covering the entire planet like some kind of coordinate system. "We think it's a network," Blake said. "The lunar site is just the control center. The real machinery is here, buried under every major population center on Earth. And according to our calculations, it's been there since before humans evolved." The temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees, and the ice on the walls began to crack. All around us, the metal fragments in their cases started moving faster, rotating and shifting with increasing urgency. "Why now?" I asked. "If this thing's been here for billions of years, why is it activating now?" Blake's answer came just as the lights began to flicker. "Because we reached the threshold. 8 billion people. That's the number it was waiting for." The main computer screen flashed with an incoming transmission, not from Earth, but from the moon. The image that appeared made my stomach drop. It was the mechanical eye from the crater, but now it was fully open and it was looking directly at the camera, directly at us. Below the image, a message appeared in perfect English. "Inventory complete. Protocol Omega initiated. Stand by." Every screen in the room went black simultaneously. Then the lights went out. In the darkness, I could hear something that definitely wasn't the building's ventilation system. It sounded like massive gears turning, very slowly, somewhere far below us. "Blake?" I called out, but my voice just echoed in the sudden silence. The emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. Blake was gone. I was alone 300 feet underground with samples of alien technology that were now glowing in the dark. The emergency lighting painted everything in hellish red, and the alien fragments were definitely glowing brighter now. Each piece pulsed in perfect synchronization, like a vast heartbeat counting down to something terrible. I called Blake's name until my throat was raw, but the only answer was the sound of those massive gears grinding somewhere in the depths below. I had to get out of here. But as I fumbled for the elevator controls, I realized the keycard reader was dark. No power. The main systems had died with the lights, leaving me trapped 300 feet underground with technology that was older than complex life on Earth. Think, Foster. Think like an investigator. There had to be another way out. Maybe a service tunnel or emergency exit. I grabbed a flashlight from the equipment locker and started methodically searching the walls. That's when I found Blake's jacket crumpled behind one of the display cases, still warm. The fabric was torn, but not by anything mechanical. The rips followed strange patterns, almost like symbols, and there was no blood, which somehow made it worse. Whatever had taken Blake had done it silently, efficiently, and very recently. My flashlight beam caught something moving in the shadows at the far end of the room. Not Blake, something much larger, with too many joints in its limbs. I clicked off the light and pressed myself against the wall, trying to control my breathing. In the darkness, I could hear it moving. A wet sliding sound, like metal dragging across wet concrete. The emergency lighting flickered, and in that strobe effect, I saw it clearly for just a moment. It looked like someone had taken a human skeleton and replaced every bone with black metal, then added extra arms that bent in impossible directions. Where its head should have been, there was a cluster of sensors that rotated independently, scanning the room. It was searching for something. For me, I started moving along the wall, feeling my way toward what I hoped was another exit. My hand found a door handle, and I turned it as slowly as possible. The door opened onto a narrow corridor lined with pipes and electrical conduits. I slipped inside and pulled the door closed behind me, hearing the mechanical creature's footsteps moving closer to where I'd been hiding. The corridor stretched into darkness, but at least it was moving upward. I followed it for what felt like miles, my flashlight beam revealing maintenance panels and junction boxes that hadn't been touched in decades. Some of the pipes were warm to the touch, carrying something that definitely wasn't water. The liquid inside glowed with the same blue light I'd seen in the lunar footage. The corridor ended at another door marked Surface Access, Authorized Personnel Only. I pushed through it and found myself in what looked like a natural cave system. The walls were rough granite, but embedded in the rock were veins of that same alien metal forming intricate patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. My phone had no signal, but the timestamp showed I'd been underground for 6 hours. 6 hours. It had felt like minutes. Something was wrong with time in this place, and I needed to get to the surface before I lost any more of it. I followed the cave upward, guided by faint air currents that tasted of desert heat. But as I climbed, I started noticing things that shouldn't have been there. Fresh boot prints in the dust, recent cigarette butts, signs that other people had been using this route regularly. The cave opened onto a hidden entrance behind a rock formation about 2 miles from Station Xerxes. The desert night was brilliant with stars, and the moon hung low on the horizon like a malevolent eye. But something was different about the sky. The stars were moving. No, not moving. Disappearing. One by one, sections of the night sky were going dark, as if something massive was passing between Earth and the cosmos. And with each disappearance, I felt a vibration in the ground beneath my feet. My phone suddenly came back to life, bombarded with emergency alerts. The first few were from local news stations reporting unusual seismic activity across California. Then national news alerts about similar events worldwide. London, Tokyo, Sydney, Moscow, every major city experiencing the same phenomenon, underground vibrations with no identifiable source. It was from my insurance company sent to all field investigators. Effective immediately, all claims involving NASA equipment to be referred to. Federal oversight. Do not investigate independently. Compliance mandatory. They knew I was here, they'd always known. I started walking back toward the station, but stopped when I saw lights moving in the distance. Vehicle headlights, at least a dozen of them, converging on Station Xerxes from multiple directions. Military vehicles, judging by their formation and speed. My satellite phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unlisted number. Foster. The voice was cold, official. We know you're out there. We need to talk. Who is this? Colonel James Hartwell, United States Space Force. We've been monitoring your investigation and we need your help. I laughed, but it sounded hysterical even to me. Help? You burned down my apartment and sent me running across the desert like a fugitive. That wasn't us. That was NASA trying to contain the situation. But containment is no longer an option. In the background, I could hear radio chatter and the sound of helicopters. Foster, what you discovered in Houston was just the beginning. The machinery isn't just on the moon. It's everywhere. Under every major city, every military installation, every population center. And 3 hours ago, it all came online simultaneously. The ground vibrated again, stronger this time. In the distance, I could see a section of the desert slowly rising, as if something enormous was pushing up from below. What do you want from me? You've seen the files. You know about Protocol Omega. But what you don't know is that there's a kill switch, a way to shut down the network before it completes its cycle. We found the specifications in the wreckage you helped us locate. What wreckage? Hartwell's pause lasted too long. Your insurance investigation wasn't random, Foster. We fed you that NASA claim specifically because your psychological profile indicated you wouldn't let it go. We needed someone outside the system to find what we couldn't. The truth hit me like a physical blow. I'd been manipulated from the beginning. My entire investigation, Blake's disappearance, even my escape from the underground facility, all of it had been orchestrated. You bastards used me. We used your skills, and now we need them again. The kill switch is in the main control hub, but it's not on Earth. It's in the original crash site, Nevada, 1947. But Foster... His voice became urgent. The site isn't underground anymore. As of 2 hours ago, it's fully surfaced, and it's moving. Through my binoculars, I watched the desert continue to bulge upward. Massive shapes were emerging from the sand, geometric structures made of that untarnished metal, rising like alien skyscrapers against the starlit sky. And they were all connected by streams of that glowing blue liquid, forming a vast network that stretched beyond the horizon. Foster, are you still there? I was watching the birth of something that had been waiting 2.8 billion years to see daylight. The alien machinery wasn't just technology, it was alive, and it had been growing beneath our feet since before humanity existed. Yeah, I whispered into the phone. I'm here. But I don't think we're alone anymore. Above us, more stars were disappearing and the moon had begun to glow with that same blue light. Protocol Omega wasn't just activating, it was calling something home. Colonel Hartwell's mobile command center was a maze of cables, screens, and men who looked like they hadn't slept in days. They'd set up the operation in an abandoned gas station 20 miles from the Nevada site, close enough to monitor the situation but far enough to avoid the worst of the electromagnetic interference. The building reeked of stale coffee and industrial disinfectant, but underneath it all was something else. Ozone, like the air after lightning strikes. Hartwell looked nothing like I'd expected from his voice. Mid-50s, scarred hands, and eyes that had seen too much classified bullshit to ever look truly surprised. But when he saw me walk through the door, something flickered across his face that might have been relief. Foster, glad you made it out of Xerxes in one piece. He gestured to a folding chair next to a bank of monitors. We need to debrief you on what you saw down there. And then I need to show you something that's going to change everything you think you know about this situation. I sat down, my legs still shaking from the adrenaline. Blake Garrison, what happened to him? Blake's been compromised for 3 weeks. We think the machinery can interface with human neural tissue under certain conditions. He's not dead exactly, but he's not Blake anymore either. Hartwell pulled up footage from the underground facility's security cameras. We've been tracking 17 similar cases worldwide. Scientists, military personnel, anyone who's had prolonged exposure to the artifacts. The video showed Blake moving through the corridors with those same 2 fluid motions I'd seen from the creature in the lab. His head turned at unnatural angles, and when he looked directly at the camera, his eyes reflected light like polished metal. Jesus, I whispered, and that's not the worst part. Hartwell switched to a different screen showing satellite imagery of the Nevada site. What had been empty desert 12 hours ago was now a sprawling complex of metallic spires and geometric structures, all connected by streams of that blue luminescent fluid. The machinery isn't the threat, Foster. It's the immune system. What the hell does that mean? Hartwell leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since I'd started this investigation, someone looked like they were about to tell me the complete truth. In 1952, we found a data cache in the Nevada wreckage. Took us 70 years to partially decode it, but the message was clear. The machinery was placed here 2.8 billion years ago as a defensive system. Earth is a quarantine world. The room suddenly felt smaller. Quarantine against what? Something that wiped out the civilization that built these machines. Something that's been systematically eliminating complex life across the galaxy for millions of years. The builders called them the Harvest Fleet. He pulled up an image that made my stomach clench. It looked like a massive organic structure, part spaceship and part living creature, easily the size of a city. They consume entire biospheres, converting all organic matter into energy for their expansion. The machinery was designed to hide developing worlds from their sensors. But it's activating now. It's calling them here. No, Hartwell's voice was grim. It's not calling them. It's preparing to fight them. The Harvest Fleet found us 3 days ago. Long-range sensors detected their approach. They'll be here in 18 hours. I stared at the monitors showing the growing network of alien structures. So this whole time, we've been trying to shut down our own defense system. Worse than that, NASA's been actively sabotaging it for decades. They thought they were protecting humanity from alien influence, but they were actually ensuring our destruction. Hartwell pulled up classified files showing deliberate interference with lunar equipment, contamination of crash sites, and systematic elimination of anyone who got too close to the truth. Every equipment failure you investigated was NASA trying to prevent the system from reaching full activation. The irony was nauseating. I'd spent my career investigating fraud, and I'd uncovered the biggest fraud in human history, our own government undermining our species' survival. The kill switch you mentioned, is it real? Hartwell nodded slowly. It's real. But it's not what you think. The kill switch isn't designed to shut down the machinery. It's designed to shut down the quarantine. If we activate it, it will send a signal across the galaxy identifying Earth as a harvested world, and the fleet will move on to the next target. How many people know about this? Including you? 7. The President doesn't know. Congress doesn't know. NASA's been operating under false assumptions for 70 years. He gestured to the screens showing global seismic activity. But it doesn't matter anymore. The system is online whether we want it or not. The question now is whether we help it or hinder it. One of the technicians called out from across the room. Colonel, you need to see this. We're getting massive energy signatures from orbit. The main screen switched to a feed from a military satellite. At first, I saw nothing but empty space and distant stars. Then the image adjusted, and I saw them. Shapes moving against the starfield, too large and too numerous to be natural. The Harvest Fleet was already here. How long do we have? I asked. 14 hours until they achieve orbital position, maybe less. Hartwell stood up, his face hard. Foster, I need to ask something of you, and you're going to hate me for it. I already hated him, but I kept my mouth shut. The kill switch can only be activated by someone who's had direct neural interface with the machinery. The system requires organic authentication, probably to prevent accidental activation. Blake was our primary candidate, but now. He gestured at the monitor showing Blake's transformed state. You need someone else who's been exposed to the artifacts. You were underground with them for 6 hours. The time distortion you experienced was the machinery scanning your neural patterns. You're now biologically linked to the system. His eyes met mine, and I saw genuine regret there. You're the only person on Earth who can activate the kill switch. The weight of what he was asking settled over me like a burial shroud. And if I do, humanity survives, but we become complicit in galactic genocide. Every other developing world in this sector becomes a target because we'll have proven that quarantine measures don't work. Hartwell's voice dropped. If you don't, the Harvest Fleet strips Earth clean, but the quarantine system potentially saves countless other worlds from the same fate. Outside, I could hear helicopters approaching, more military personnel, probably more people who thought they understood the situation, but had no idea of the real scope. The monitors showed the alien structures continuing to grow, reaching toward the sky like metallic trees stretching toward some impossible sun. There's a third option, I said finally. What's that? We find a way to make the defense system work without triggering galactic exposure. Fight the fleet without compromising the quarantine. I stood up, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. But first, we need to get to that Nevada site and figure out exactly what we're dealing with. Hartwell smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Foster, that might be the smartest damn thing anyone's said in the last 70 years. The smile faded as alarms started blaring throughout the command center. On the screens, the shapes in orbit were beginning to descend toward Earth's atmosphere. We were out of time. The convoy to the Nevada site moved under a sky that was rapidly losing stars. Military vehicles surrounded our transport, but I couldn't shake the feeling we were heading towards something that would make our weapons irrelevant. Hartwell sat across from me in the armored personnel carrier, his face illuminated by the glow of tactical displays that showed the Harvest Fleet's descent trajectory. First contact in 8 hours, he said, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. The lead ships are the size of Manhattan, and they're moving in perfect formation. Whatever intelligence guides them has been doing this for a very long time. Through the reinforced windows, I could see the Nevada site growing on the horizon. What had been a small cluster of metallic spires 6 hours ago was now a sprawling metropolis of alien architecture. Towers that defied physics twisted into the sky, connected by streams of that blue luminescent fluid that pulsed with increasing urgency. The structures seemed to be growing as we watched, extending tendrils deep into the earth and reaching toward the heavens like the limbs of some vast organism preparing to defend itself. "Jesus fucking Christ," whispered one of the soldiers. "It's beautiful." He was right, and that was the most terrifying part. The alien machinery wasn't the cold, clinical technology I'd expected. It was organic, flowing, almost artistic in its complexity. Watching it grow was like watching a flower bloom in fast motion if flowers were made of metal and designed to fight wars across galactic distances. Our convoy stopped at what the military had designated as a safe perimeter, roughly 2 miles from the main structure. But as we disembarked, I realized there was no such thing as a safe distance anymore. The ground beneath our feet hummed with activity, and I could feel the vibrations in my bones. Whatever was happening here extended far beyond what we could see on the surface. Hartwell was setting up a field command post when the first betrayal hit. His radio crackled with an incoming transmission, and his face went pale as he listened to the voice on the other end. "What is it?" I asked. "NASA Administrator Briggs. He's here with a full containment team." Hartwell's jaw tightened. "They're moving to implement what they're calling Scorched Earth Protocol. Nuclear sterilization of the site. But that'll destroy our defense system. That's the point. Briggs believes human survival depends on making ourselves invisible to the Harvest Fleet. If we eliminate all traces of the alien technology, they might pass us by." Hartwell shook his head in disgust. 70 years of sabotage, and he still doesn't understand what we're really dealing with. In the distance, I could see helicopters approaching from the south. Military aircraft, but not ours. The insignia was NASA's, but the weapons they carried were definitely not standard issue. "Hartwell," one of his technicians called out urgently. "We've got massive energy spikes from the structure. Something's happening." The alien metropolis was responding to the approaching threat. The towers were rotating, realigning themselves like enormous weapons preparing to fire. And high above us, the first shapes of the Harvest Fleet were beginning to glow as they entered Earth's atmosphere. "Foster, we need to move now." Hartwell grabbed a combat pack and started jogging toward the alien structure. "If NASA destroys this site before the fleet arrives, we'll have no defense at all." We ran across the desert floor, but as we got closer to the alien structures, reality started to bend. The ground beneath our feet became translucent, revealing vast mechanical networks extending deep into the Earth's core. The air itself seemed to thicken, taking on the consistency of liquid while still remaining breathable. And the sounds, mechanical harmonies that resonated in frequencies I could feel in my chest cavity. "Colonel," one of Hartwell's men pointed skyward. "Contact!" The first harvest ship broke through the cloud layer like a falling cathedral. It was larger than anything human engineering could have conceived, its surface covered in what looked like organic growths that pulsed with malevolent life. As it descended, smaller craft detached from its hull, dozens of them, each one still larger than our biggest aircraft. But the alien defense system was ready for them. The towers around us began to sing. That's the only way I can describe the sound they made. A harmonic resonance that seemed to reach into the fundamental frequencies of matter itself. Beams of that blue energy lanced upward, striking the descending ships with surgical precision. Where the beams hit, the organic hulls of the harvest craft began to dissolve, their matter converting into something that looked like scattered starlight. "My God," Hartwell breathed, "it's working. The system is actually fighting them." That's when the second betrayal hit. Hartwell's radio squawked with a priority override signal. The voice that emerged was cold, mechanical, and definitely not human. "Colonel Hartwell, this is NASA Deep 6. Your mission parameters have changed." Hartwell froze, his face going white. "Foster, run." "What?" NASA Deep 6 was disbanded in 1975. The only thing that could be using that call sign is... The thing that had been Hartwell turned toward me, and I saw that his eyes now reflected light the same way Blake's had. The neural interface hadn't just happened to random scientists and military personnel. It had been happening to everyone with prolonged exposure, including Hartwell. "The machinery requires organic components to function at full capacity," Hartwell said, his voice carrying harmonics that definitely weren't human. "Your neural patterns are needed for integration." I ran. Behind me, I could hear Hartwell calling my name, but his voice was changing, becoming something that belonged in the spaces between radio frequencies rather than in human throats. The alien structures were growing taller as the battle intensified overhead. The harvest fleet was deploying more ships, and while the defense system was holding them back, I could see that it was taking tremendous energy to do so. The blue streams connecting the towers were pulsing so rapidly they appeared solid, and the ground was beginning to crack under the strain. I reached what looked like the main control spire, a tower that rose at least 1,000 feet into the air and was covered in symbols that shifted and changed as I watched. At its base was an opening just large enough for a human to enter, and I could feel the machinery calling to me through the neural link it had established during my time in the underground facility. Inside, the tower was hollow, filled with flowing streams of that luminescent blue substance. Platforms of living metal extended from the walls at irregular intervals, creating a spiral pathway that led upward into darkness. As I climbed, I could hear the battle raging outside, the harmonic weapons of the defense system, the organic screams of dying harvest ships, and underneath it all, the steady rhythm of massive engines preparing for something much worse. Halfway up the spire, I found what I was looking for. The control interface was nothing like human technology. It was a pool of liquid metal surrounded by floating geometric shapes that responded to thought rather than touch. When I approached it, the shapes began to orbit around me, and I felt the system probing deeper into my mind. Through the interface, I could see the battle from the defense system's perspective. The harvest fleet wasn't just trying to land, they were trying to drain the energy from Earth's core, using some kind of massive siphon that would leave the planet as lifeless as Mars. But the defense system was holding them back, converting their matter into energy and feeding it back into the network. The problem was sustainability. The system was burning through enormous amounts of power, and while it could hold off this attack, larger fleet elements were already moving in from the outer solar system. Without more energy sources, the defense would fail within hours. That's when I understood what the system was asking of me. The neural interface could work both ways. Instead of just reading my thoughts, it could integrate my consciousness into the network, using human intuition and creativity to enhance its tactical capabilities. I would become part of the machinery, but the system would gain the unpredictability that might surprise the fleet. Outside, something massive impacted the ground nearby. Through the tower's translucent walls, I could see a harvest ship, damaged but still functional, beginning to disgorge troops that looked like organic versions of the mechanical creatures I'd encountered underground. The choice was simple: remain human and watch our defense fail, or integrate with the system and possibly give humanity a fighting chance. I reached toward the control interface, but before I could make contact, the tower shuddered violently. Through the walls, I could see aircraft approaching, NASA's sterilization team, carrying weapons that would destroy the defense system just as the harvest fleet reached maximum strength. The irony was perfect. Humanity's own ignorance was about to ensure our destruction. I pressed my hands into the liquid metal interface and felt my consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of my skull. The merger was not gentle. The integration tore through my mind like lightning made of liquid mercury. One moment I was Daniel Foster, insurance investigator from Houston, and the next I was something that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously while still somehow fitting inside a human skull. The alien defense network opened itself to me like a flower blooming in reverse, revealing layer upon layer of tactical data, strategic calculations, and something that might have been emotions if emotions could be measured in terawatts. Through the network's senses, I could perceive the battle raging across three-dimensional space and several others that didn't have names in any human language. The harvest fleet wasn't just attacking Earth's surface. They were simultaneously assaulting reality itself, trying to collapse our local spacetime into something more suitable for their feeding apparatus. But now I understood their weakness. The fleet operated on perfect mathematical precision, every movement calculated, every strategy based on algorithms refined over millions of years of conquest. They had never encountered a defense system augmented by human intuition, by the glorious chaos of organic thought processes that could make decisions based on incomplete information and pure, stubborn spite. I felt myself smile, though I was no longer entirely sure which part of me was doing the smiling. Through the network, I watched NASA's sterilization team approaching the main spire. Administrator Briggs was leading them personally, his face set in the rigid certainty of a man who had spent 70 years believing his own propaganda. The nuclear devices they carried were powerful enough to flatten the entire complex, but they had no idea what they were really trying to destroy. The defense network showed me 17 different ways to stop them. I could redirect the harmonic weapons downward, turning Briggs and his team into scattered atoms. I could manipulate the local gravity fields to trap them in temporal loops. I could even send the mechanical drones that had taken Blake to deal with them physically. Instead, I chose a different approach. The network hesitated, a flutter of confusion that translated into a momentary weakening of the shields protecting us from the fleet's energy siphons. Through our shared consciousness, I felt its question. Why preserve the humans who sought to destroy us? Because they don't understand what they're doing, I projected back. And because I'm still human enough to remember what it feels like to be wrong. I used the network's communication array to override every electronic device within 50 miles, including the radios, phones, and helmet displays of Briggs's team. What I transmitted wasn't words or images, but pure experiential data. A direct sensory feed of what the harvest fleet was really doing to Earth's core. The effect was immediate and visceral. Through their own eyes, Briggs's team saw the massive organic tendrils that had already penetrated 7,000 miles into the planet, draining thermal energy and converting it into some kind of exotic matter that the fleet required for reproduction. They felt the planet's magnetic field weakening as the core cooled, experienced the projected timeline, showing Earth as a frozen, lifeless rock within the next 6 hours. Most importantly, they saw what the defense network was actually doing. Not conquering humanity, but buying us time while it tried to figure out how to save a planet whose own inhabitants kept sabotaging their rescue. Briggs's voice came through the communication array, shaky but determined. "Foster, is that you in there? What's left of me?" My voice emerged from speakers throughout the complex, harmonized with frequencies that made the air itself vibrate. "Administrator, you need to call off the sterilization. The defense system isn't the threat." How do I know you're still human? How do I know this isn't some kind of alien manipulation? The question hit deeper than it should have, because I wasn't entirely sure of the answer myself. The integration had changed me in ways I was still discovering. I could perceive electromagnetic spectrums that didn't exist yesterday, solve mathematical equations that would have required supercomputers, and feel the heartbeat of every living thing within 100 miles. But somewhere in the expanding complexity of my consciousness, there was still a stubborn core that remembered growing up in suburban Dallas and getting fired from 3 different jobs before finding my calling as an insurance investigator. Because I'm about to do something really fucking stupid, I transmitted back, and that's the most human thing there is. Above us, the largest harvest ship I'd seen yet was breaking through the upper atmosphere. This wasn't just a feeding vessel, it was what the network's memory banks identified as a reproductive ark, capable of converting an entire planet's biosphere into raw materials for constructing dozens of new fleet units. Its arrival changed the tactical situation from desperate to hopeless. The defense network ran the calculations and shared them with me. Even at full capacity, we could only delay the ark's feeding cycle by perhaps 2 hours. The energy requirements for actually destroying something that large would drain Earth's core faster than the harvest fleet could, leaving us just as dead, but with the satisfaction of taking our enemies with us. Unless. The network's memory banks contained records of previous battles, planets where the defense systems had faced similar odds. In 97.3% of cases, the outcome was total biosphere loss. But in the remaining 2.7%, something had happened that the original builders hadn't anticipated. The indigenous species had found ways to augment the defense network's capabilities beyond its original specifications. Most of those cases had involved species with natural bioelectric capabilities. Humans didn't qualify, except for one crucial detail. We had developed technology that could artificially enhance bioelectric fields. The same neural interface technology that was transforming me could potentially be scaled up, allowing voluntary integration of additional human consciousness into the network. The plan that formed in my expanded awareness was beautiful, terrible, and completely insane. "Briggs," I transmitted, "I need you to do something that's going to sound like the ravings of a man who's lost his mind." "I'm listening." "I need you to round up every person with high-level security clearance within 100 miles and bring them here. Scientists, military personnel, intelligence operatives, anyone with the psychological profile to handle cognitive expansion without complete mental breakdown." "Foster, what are you asking?" "I'm asking you to help me turn a dozen humans into temporary gods." Through the speakers, I could hear my laughter, and it sounded like wind chimes made of crystal and starlight. The network can support multiple integrated consciousnesses, but only if they're volunteering. We can create a collective intelligence powerful enough to not just fight the harvest fleet, but to send a message that will make them think twice about attacking quarantine worlds in the future. And the cost? I felt the network calculating probabilities, running projections of what such an integration would do to human neural tissue. The numbers weren't encouraging. Complete psychological transformation, we might not be recognizably human afterward. Hell, we might not survive the process at all. I paused, feeling the weight of what I was proposing. But the alternative is watching 8 billion people die while we could have saved them. Briggs was quiet for a long moment, and through the network's sensors, I could see him staring up at the growing shadow of the reproductive arc. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the exhaustion of a man who had spent his entire career making impossible choices. "How long do I have to find volunteers?" "The arc reaches optimal feeding position in 90 minutes. We need at least 6 additional consciousnesses integrated before then, or the collective intelligence won't have sufficient processing power to coordinate a successful counterattack." "And if we can't find enough volunteers?" I felt the network's tactical subroutines calculating our remaining options. They were all variations on martyrdom. "Then we activate the kill switch and hope the quarantine system works better for the next species that evolves here." Through the communication array, I heard Briggs giving orders to his team, calling in favors from contacts across the military and intelligence communities, and making promises he probably couldn't keep. But he was moving, and that was what mattered. High above us, the reproductive arc was beginning its descent, and the smaller fleet ships were repositioning themselves to support its feeding operation. The organic tendrils that had penetrated Earth's core were pulsing faster now, drawing energy at an accelerated rate. Through the network's sensors, I could feel the planet's magnetic field weakening with each pulse. In the desert around the defense complex, the first volunteers were arriving. Military personnel who had spent their careers following orders they didn't fully understand. Scientists who had dedicated their lives to questions bigger than themselves. Intelligence operatives who were used to sacrificing their identities for the greater good. Each one would have to make the same choice I had made: remain human and probably die, or become something new and unknown for a chance to save everyone. The integration chambers were growing from the spire's walls like metallic flowers, each one calibrated for human neural patterns, but enhanced with the network's understanding of consciousness as a quantifiable force. Time was running out, and we were about to discover whether human adaptability was enough to surprise an enemy that had been perfecting genocide for millions of years. I felt my humanity slipping away by degrees, but somehow that made me more determined than ever to save it. The first volunteer to enter the integration chamber was Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a xenobiologist who had spent 20 years studying extremophile organisms in preparation for this moment without ever knowing it. As the liquid metal interface flowed over her, I felt her consciousness join the network, a brilliant spark of curiosity and determination that made our collective intelligence more than the sum of its parts. The second was Colonel Marcus Webb, whose military tactical experience created new pathways in our shared awareness. The third was Dr. James Okafor, whose understanding of quantum mechanics allowed us to perceive the fleet's interdimensional attack vectors. Each integration brought exponential increases in our capabilities, but also took something irreplaceable from each volunteer. Through the network's senses, I watched their human personalities fragment and reformulate into something that could process information at light speed while still retaining the essential spark that made human consciousness unique. They were still themselves, but they were also something infinitely larger. By the time we had 7 integrated consciousnesses, the reproductive arc had reached orbital position and begun extending its feeding apparatus toward Earth's surface. The organic tendrils were now visible from the ground, massive tubular structures that writhed through the atmosphere like the roots of some impossible tree, each one capable of draining the energy from entire continents. But our collective intelligence was ready for them. What happened next was impossible to describe in purely human terms, because it involved tactical decisions made across 17 dimensions simultaneously. The integrated consciousness that Foster had become was still me, but was also Martinez's biological expertise, Webb's strategic thinking, Okafor's quantum intuition, and 4 others whose specialties created a symphony of capabilities that no single mind could have contained. We struck at the fleet's weaknesses with precision that surprised even the network's original programming. The harmonic weapons recalibrated themselves to frequencies that disrupted the organic matter of the harvest ships at a molecular level. The defense towers repositioned themselves in configurations that created gravity wells, trapping the smaller fleet vessels in temporal distortion fields where they aged centuries in seconds. But the reproductive arc was too large, too well defended for conventional attacks. Its feeding apparatus continued extending toward Earth despite everything we threw at it, and the planet's core temperature was dropping so rapidly that the magnetic field began fluctuating dangerously. That's when I understood what we really had to do. The network's memory banks contained one final option, a technique that the original builders had used only once before, on a world called Kepler 442b. It required channeling the entire output of a planet's core through the consciousness of the integrated defenders, essentially turning them into living weapons capable of projecting energy across interstellar distances. The cost was absolute. The defenders of Kepler 442b had saved their world and sent a message that caused the Harvest fleet to avoid that sector for 3 million years, but none of them had survived the process. Through our collective awareness, I felt the other 6 consciousnesses considering the option. Martinez's analytical mind calculated the probability of success. Webb's tactical experience evaluated the strategic implications. Okafor's quantum intuition grasped the physics involved, and all of them came to the same conclusion I had reached. We were going to burn ourselves out like candles in a hurricane, but we were going to take the entire reproductive arc with us. The decision was unanimous and instantaneous. The network began channeling Earth's core energy through our integrated consciousnesses, and the sensation was indescribable. It was like becoming the focal point of a star while somehow remaining aware of the process. Every cell in my body became a conduit for power that could have lit cities, and I felt the others experiencing the same transformation. We had perhaps 30 seconds before our neural tissue would be completely consumed by the energy flow, but 30 seconds was enough. The beam that erupted from the defense complex wasn't like the harmonic weapons we'd been using. It was pure concentrated starlight, a column of energy that punched through the reproductive arc's defensive systems like they were made of tissue paper. The arc's organic hull began to dissolve, its feeding apparatus retracting as emergency systems tried to seal the breach. But we weren't just destroying the ship, we were sending a message. Through the energy beam, we transmitted everything the network had learned about human consciousness, our unpredictability, our capacity for self-sacrifice, our stubborn refusal to accept defeat, even in impossible circumstances. We showed the fleet what it meant to fight an enemy that could make decisions based on hope instead of mathematics. The reproductive arc's death throes were visible from orbit as it broke apart, its massive bulk burning up in Earth's atmosphere like the world's largest meteor shower. The smaller fleet vessels immediately began retreating, their tactical algorithms suddenly faced with a scenario they had never encountered. A successfully defended quarantine world that had fought back with weapons powered by the voluntary sacrifice of its defenders. Through our fading consciousness, I felt the fleet's command structure updating its protocols. Earth would be marked as a hostile environment, not to be approached without overwhelming force. More importantly, the quarantine system's effectiveness had been proven, which meant other developing worlds would be given the same protection we had received. The price of that protection was burning through us like acid through silk. I felt Martinez's consciousness dissolve first, her final thought a fragment of wonder at the beauty of the energy patterns we were creating. Webb followed seconds later, his tactical mind cataloguing defensive positions to the very end. One by one, the others faded until only I remained, holding the energy conduit open through sheer stubbornness. But even stubbornness had its limits. As my consciousness began to fragment, I felt the network itself changing. The energy we had channeled through our minds had fundamentally altered its programming, incorporating elements of human intuition and creativity into its core functions. Future defenders wouldn't need to sacrifice themselves the way we had. The system had learned from our example and evolved beyond its original parameters. In my final moments of awareness, I felt the planet's magnetic field stabilizing as the core temperature began to return to normal. The organic tendrils that had penetrated so deeply into Earth were withering and dissolving, their connection to the fleet severed permanently. Humanity would survive, the quarantine would hold, and somewhere in the deep spaces between stars, the Harvest Fleet would remember what happened when they encountered a species crazy enough to turn themselves into living weapons rather than surrender their world. The last thing I experienced was a sensation of falling, not through physical space, but through layers of consciousness that I hadn't known existed. As Foster, I had been an insurance investigator who stumbled onto the biggest fraud in human history. As part of the network, I had become something that could perceive the universe in ways that had no names. But as I fell back into whatever remained of my individual awareness, I discovered something unexpected. The integration hadn't completely destroyed my human identity. It had compressed it, distilled it down to its essential components, and stored it within the network's memory banks. I was still Daniel Foster, insurance investigator, but I was also something that would exist as long as the defense system remained active, a ghost in the machine that remembered what it felt like to be human and why that was worth fighting for. The desert around the defense complex was silent, except for the wind moving through the alien structures. The towers had retracted back into the earth, their work complete for now. Above us, the stars were visible again, no longer blocked by the shadows of hostile ships. Somewhere in the ruins of NASA's command post, Administrator Briggs would be trying to figure out how to explain what had happened to a world that still didn't know how close it had come to extinction. The cover-up would be massive, the truth buried under layers of classified documents and official denials. But the insurance files would remain. Scattered across databases and backup servers, the evidence of humanity's first and last contact with the Harvest Fleet would wait for the next investigator curious enough to follow the trail. And deep beneath the Nevada desert, the defense system would continue its patient vigil, powered now by the echoes of human consciousness that had chosen transcendence over survival. The quarantine would hold, the price had been worth paying. 6 months after what the media called the Nevada earthquake swarm, life in Houston returned to its normal rhythm of traffic jams, humidity, and insurance fraud. The offices of Morrison and Associates received a new investigator to replace Daniel Foster, who had officially been killed in a car accident while pursuing a routine claim in California. Timothy Barnes was 26, fresh out of college, and eager to make his mark in the industry. He moved into Foster's old office, hanging his diploma where Foster's commendations used to be, and dove into the backlog of cases with the enthusiasm of someone who still believed the world made sense. It was Barnes who found the manila envelope wedged behind Foster's filing cabinet, apparently overlooked by whoever had cleaned out the office after his disappearance. The envelope contained photocopies of documents that made no immediate sense. Equipment failure reports from NASA, insurance claims for damaged lunar rovers, and photographs of what looked like construction equipment buried in moon dust. Barnes almost threw the whole thing away, almost. But Foster had trained him to spot patterns, and there was definitely a pattern here. Dozens of similar claims over a span of decades, all involving the same type of equipment malfunction, all settled quickly and quietly with unusually large payments. It looked like systematic fraud, the kind of case that could make a junior investigator's career. Barnes began making phone calls. The first few NASA contacts hung up on him immediately. The next group claimed they'd never heard of the equipment serial numbers he was asking about. But eventually, he found someone willing to talk, a former contractor named Blake Garrison who agreed to meet him at a truck stop outside 29 Palms. Blake looked like he'd aged 10 years in 6 months. His hair had gone completely grey, and his hands shook when he lit his cigarettes. But his eyes were sharp, focused, and when Barnes showed him the photographs from Foster's envelope, something flickered across his face that might have been recognition. "You want to know about Danny Foster?" Blake asked, his voice carrying a weight that made Barnes uncomfortable. "I want to know about these insurance claims. Foster was investigating them before his accident." Blake laughed, but there was no humour in the sound. "Accident, right." He stubbed out his cigarette and stood up. "Kid, let me give you some free advice. File those papers under unsolvable and move on with your life. Some cases aren't worth solving. But the fraud patterns are obvious. Someone's been bilking the insurance companies for millions. The patterns are obvious because someone wanted them to be obvious." Blake started walking toward his truck, then stopped and looked back. Foster thought he was investigating insurance fraud too. You know what he actually uncovered? Barnes waited. The bill. Blake's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. He found the bill for keeping 8 billion people alive, and when the time came to pay it, he did. Blake drove away, leaving Barnes alone in the parking lot with more questions than answers and a growing certainty that Daniel Foster's death hadn't been accidental at all. That night, Barnes sat in his apartment staring at the photographs of crushed lunar rovers and trying to convince himself that Blake was just a conspiracy theorist with too much imagination. But the equipment serial numbers were real, the insurance payments were documented, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded like his training instructor kept whispering that fraud investigators who ask the right questions sometimes find answers they weren't prepared for. Barnes locked the photographs in his home safe and went to bed. But he didn't sleep well because his dreams were full of stars going out one by one, and somewhere in the darkness, something that might have been Daniel Foster was counting them as they disappeared. In the morning, Barnes would file the case under pending further investigation and try to forget about lunar rovers and mysterious contractors who spoke in riddles. He would fail on both counts. The pattern was already working on him the same way it had worked on Foster, because some truths are too important to stay buried, even when the people who discovered them paid the ultimate price to keep the rest of us from ever knowing they existed. The investigation would continue. It always did.